Yes, welcome everybody. And we have today Taylor that's working on a very nice new framework. And I thought it was interesting to for him to share what he's working on. I've just seen the documentation and it looks really nice. So I'm curious myself. And please, Taylor, go ahead if you want to do any introduction or take it from here.
Sure. I know it's spelled a little weird, but my name's actually Tyler.
Tyler, sorry.
So, all good, all good. I get that one quite a lot, so I'm used to it. My mom doesn't know how to spell, so I got this weird thing.
Look, I'm called. My name is Michael, and I'm Italian. So nobody gets it. Nobody calls me by my proper name.
Well, then you can relate. My name's Tylor Steinberger. I've been a professional engineer for about 7 years now. Self-taught. Been working in JS frameworks pretty much since the beginning, and been really focused in on front-end web here for the past 3 years or so. I kind of forced that to be my path. I just kind of like being closer to the user along the experience and working with designers and all that kind of stuff. But
And I guess that's not the first framework that you aim to develop. If I read correctly, you were involved in most JS and other front end frameworks before. Correct me if I'm wrong.
yeah, I wouldn't consider most.js a framework. It's really just a reactive streams library. And its goals were pretty much, there's a lot of strictness around time semantics and around performance, and you won't find an observable or push-based stream library in JavaScript that's faster. I dare you to try. I'd love to see it. But yeah, I got started. The very first thing when I was teaching myself to program was a framework called Cycle.js. And I saw a video on YouTube before I even knew how to program, and it just from Andre Staltz, the author, and it was just like, yeah, I want to know how to do that. And so I got involved in their open source project. I helped some. I'd like to think I helped a lot. In kind of tuning the performance. I had a big hand in reframing the way we worked with the DOM, switching libraries to faster things, and adding features, routing, and everything else that were unsolved problems in the Cycle.js community when I joined. And, that kind of started my bias towards push-based reactive streams. But interestingly enough, I got my first 2 development jobs through Cycle.js, and people in the community, they were like, hey, I have a job, I'm going to do this in Cycle. So we need experts, and there basically was none. So they
Well, I
got
guess
me
that's always
instead.
the advantage when you build something. The first people that use it, they need experts, and experts don't exist. So you get a job
Exactly.
out of it, yeah.
Yeah. So I got my foot into this career field, and I haven't looked back. But yeah, I've just been building frameworky things ever since. It's just kind of a passion. And over the last few years, I've been trying to build similar things here to Effect on top of generators. And it's interesting. I've kind of come full circle because I have actually dropped code for line, some code from Cycle.js into typed. Because I feel like it finally solves the things that I actually intended for it to solve 7 years ago. Because now we have Effect for, in particular, the dependency injection. Cycle.js had monstrous amounts of prop drilling, and
Which I guess
it was
that's
basically
a
an
fairly
onion.
common problem of stream-based libraries, or rather observable based libraries. I did not have a huge experience with Cycle.js, but I've worked priorly with Arux.js in similar architectures, and that was really one of the pain points. You didn't really have any semantic of top down injection of context and bottom up recognition of what a component actually needs and use. I love also the error semantics, the fact that you have it explicit and so on and so forth, but I could get around something that doesn't have explicit error semantics. You know, it's not the best, but still you can get around it. I never liked the fact that I couldn't have higher order behavior around dependency injection and context. So I definitely 100% share your view on this. I'm excited that honestly after I've watched your full circle going through generators and everything else, and I was like pleasantly surprised that at the end you decided to sort of merge into effect. I guess we never had the chance of actually discussing really the semantics of streaming and so on and so forth, and maybe we'll do that in a future sense. I I kind of understand that you are biased towards push based semantics. I'm biased on pull based semantics because probably we come from uh, slightly different places. I've mostly worked with data, and pull semantics gives you constant memory and other properties that push based semantics don't. But the other way around is also true. There are things that push based semantics give you that this doesn't, that pull based don't. I'm really curious if we'll ever get to a point where kind of consolidate them in the same structure that can deal with both aspects. I don't even know if it makes sense, but I've read a lot of papers, pull versus push versus pull versus push. Semantically, they can represent the same things, but with slightly different trade-offs. I'm really curious if we ever get to the point where there's a godlike data type that encompasses both. But I guess this ties into your current work with typed that I'm really excited to see.
And I don't know that I've ever come across anything that really joins the two. I've when I've read some of the stuff that's a lot older on like classic FRP, is there's always both, and they're usually separate, and it's usually that you utilize the push-based semantics to pull something, like when you want to interop with them. So you have like some event, and it's like, okay, now let me sample what this latest element is or this latest value, and then do something with it. Because it doesn't seem there's quite as a natural an interop from push into pull, but pull into push isn't too bad.
It depends if you do it on data, and there's the stack in between. So you're gonna push a lot of things in the stack, like and then you need stuff like back pressuring and so on and so forth. So if I'm, for example, reading a file which is 1 terabyte, I don't want to
Yes,
put the file in
you
memory.
don't want to
I
push
don't
that.
want I don't want that. I want to read it chunk by chunk, slice by
Absolutely.
slice, and go there. So for those types of things, pool based is really, it
Yeah,
it
perfect.
doesn't raise the same problematics that you usually would have in a push sense. But the opposite is also true. If you then have to push everything to a queue to then pull it back, you're looping around. So
Right.
both things really exist for reasons. I'm just curious if we ever get to a point of representing those in a single composable way. I'm not really thinking on should they be the same implementation. Probably no, because they have different trade-offs. But I would like to compose them well. and composition for effect is really the core of the driver. I think if you build something which is composable, it's gonna be 10-0, something that is ad hoc and not composable. I have no idea if we'll ever get there with
Yeah,
streams, but it's something that excites me.
yeah, it's definitely a place to explore.
Good, good. Do we maybe want to start looking at something on the typed front and what you've been working with?
Sure. I didn't have anything prepared exactly, but I can uh, maybe start with like some overview of what the project is and
Yeah.
isn't. And sure. So typed has been a work in progress for a long time, honestly. It's changed a lot of forms over the years. It's only here within like a little less than a year I've started trying to re-architect it to work on top of effect. I used to have my own generator-based kind of effect system in here. It was nowhere near as powerful as effect, but I definitely stole a healthy amount of ideas from you guys along the way too. Which kind of oh,
Oh, that's the best of open source. The code is there to be stolen for free for everybody, and we stole a lot of code from other languages and other stuff. So that's
absolutely.
the
And
very
that's
essence of open source.
why I want to keep this stuff open source. It's important to share knowledge, especially niche knowledge like what we're building here with effect and everything else. Most people don't know what stack frames and continuations really look like in terms of code and all this kind of crazy stuff. It's nice to have a repository somewhere. Um, well, so typed is, it really started off as much more of a toolkit. Um, I'd kind of gotten sort of burned by using React for a long time. Um, and I really disliked the fact that state management and view rendering were intrinsically linked. You know, I can't test my hooks without rendering a component. Uh, and it just, I don't know, I always just felt really hesitant to ever actually use it. I just ended up not testing a lot of hooks and doing more. Yeah,
It's
it was
very
just
common.
never seemed worthwhile. And so kind of learning more generally about algebraic effects and things of that nature, I wanted to try and find something that allowed these things to stay a little bit more separate, still be able to come to a cohesive whole. And it ended up being effect is the glue between all of these things for me now. But so typed is intentionally able to be used separately. You could use different parts of the library on their own. In particular, like the effects library could be used on its own if you just need some streams and you don't want to deal with the rest of it. And then some of the other stuff build on the streams, so you might have to accept that. But we have packages for navigation. It's kind of roughly modeled after the upcoming navigation API that's coming to the web. I think only Chrome has support for it so far, and I'm a Firefox user, so not quite ready to use it. But that'll allow you to keep track of, you know, what's the current entry that I'm looking at? Can I go backwards? Can I go forwards? All those kinds of things that you do when you're routing. It's kind of the low level of that. And then kind of building up to the router, there's a path package in here. And really it's like a kind of a type safe DSL around path to regex. So you have some of these types for constructing template literal types. So how do you represent params? And so you can utilize these to ensure that you always create valid uh, path parameters and things of that nature, optional ones with different prefixes, query parameters, all of these kinds of things, joining them together, um, kind of formatting different things. As we kind of build up here, you'll see a shit ton of type level code, pattern matching over a lot of these different things. And the cool thing about, at least the thing that I think is the cool thing about this package in particular, is you can take a particular path with parameters and things of that nature. And I think we have some tests in here. Yeah, you can take some paths and things of that nature. So I have this one that has one parameter b, and you can kind of, you can even interpolate them at the type level. So if you give it this path, you give it a parameter b, it knows quite literally that this is the path that it ends up creating. If you pass in foo, it ends up a/foo.
And this is interpolating the object into in yeah, into the template literal.
And it
That's
works in
really
the other
nice.
way. I guess I don't have any tests just yet for. I think it's param but you can do it in the reverse, and it will know. All the values are always strings, since paths are always strings. So kind of push any sort of decoding or anything up into your application code, since it just makes this API more cumbersome if I do it here. Uh,
And I guess ideally we have other in the idea of it being a toolkit rather than a full framework. We have other means of decoding a
right.
structure to a more refined manner. For example, effect schema and other stuff. So it could quite literally be kind of plugged into
Absolutely,
the
and
rest
that's
of the
definitely
ecosystem.
something I want to explore as I get further along. Is how do I bring in effect schema for more of these things? And what's the right APIs? If people have ideas, I'm totally yours. I haven't gotten there just yet. But that's kind of the core of it. Um, and then path kind of builds up to our router, or I guess I should say the route package. And this is really small, um, and it's basically just a wrapper around path to reg expression. And so the path library utilizes the path to regex regular expressions syntax, and it parses all of it with the exception of arbitrary regular expressions. I wasn't quite feeling ambitious enough to create a type level regex parser. But all of this,
Yeah, I wouldn't go there.
I probably will get there one day because I'm bored or curious enough, but I just haven't quite done it yet. I would definitely be willing to accept a PR for it. So a route here is, it's really just whatever path that you had created with the path library, or at least one that's compatible with it. You can write string literals in line. And there are three operations that kind of come with them by default. So you can make a route. So this will accept the parameters that it parses out of the path, and then it will create the interpolated value, as we kind of saw a little bit before. You have the ability to match a particular route, so kind of going in the other direction, given some arbitrary path, uh, we either have a none or a sum of the parameters that it would match. And so this allows you, or the reason I kind of went with this is I really like having both of these in a single place. So I can't create paths that aren't going to actually work in my application for the first. And then it's just really nice to not have to do a bunch of typecasting on the parameters that are coming back out when you match against them. And then the last bit of a route is the ability to concatenate two routes. And this does some type level stuff to make sure that they all end up being happy. I don't think I think I actually have one little stashed example we'll come back to here. But I have my TypeScript still loading. I have a route foo. You can tell these are totally contrived, but and route bar, and then you can concatenate the two. It ends up knowing exactly what it is, and it's smart enough. I think the only logic that it'll do is it'll handle like if you try to concatenate stuff with multiple forward slashes, it will trim them to one and a few things like that, but mostly just stuffs them together. So that's kind of, path works directly on like the path to regex strings themselves, and then route kind of puts them into a data structure that just wraps over path to regex's main functionality for creating and matching routes, which ultimately builds up to our router. And I guess actually this is a decent place to be. And this is a very contrived example still. But our router, it's split up into sort of two things. There's the router service, which I guess I can pop over to. Where are we? The router service itself mainly abstracts over whatever the current route is. And so as a data structure, you can pass or provide what is the current router, and that'll allow different parts of your application to be able to specify what is like this base route, or what are these links relative to. So if you want to kind of use more of a fractal nature where, inside of this component, it only knows what like forward slash is and forward slash, foo or bar or whatever. But then it doesn't have to know that it's actually mounted at, some other base path. Router can allow you to kind of configure that. And as a data structure, you have access to the current params that are associated to any particular route. I'll kind of gloss over this type just a little bit. I don't know that we want to get too deep into all the push-based stream stuff that I have going on. But I have a type called a ref subject. Is fairly similar to the synchronized ref that you guys have in Effect Stream, in that it merges a state keeping portion with the ability to subscribe to those changes over time. And then kind of extending that sort of concept. I call that data type a ref subject, kind of stealing from the ref from effect, and then a subject from push-based kind of terminology. But kind of going from a ref subject, you have two kind of classes of operations that you can do from there. Where ref subject is kind of invariant, like it has some value a going in and out of it. You can map a ref subject, and you get this thing called a computed type. And it looks
Which I guess it's no longer invariant because that represent only the observing part. So you can do all the mapping aspects which you couldn't do directly
correct. And
on the base
so
one.
I think I have a test for computed in particular. So you can create a ref subject from my effects library, but you call make ref, and you initialize it with a stream, or not a stream, with an effect. So they are lazily instantiated with the effect, and they can be reinitialized later if you want to delete them and like refetch them. Something, just a pattern that I've found really useful in my front end apps. But once you have a ref subject, you can map them. And so in this case, I'm just doing it synchronously. And both a ref subject and computeds and filtereds, as I'll talk about in a second, they're all valid effects too. So you can, at least in this case, I'm using characters, so you can use them
You can use
directly to get the current value.
nice.
You can also map effects if you want to do effects. You can, if you need to do effectful things, it will add any resources or errors and things of that nature. That could be possibly there. So computeds, they always have a value that you can get. So there's no possibility of not getting a value, because a ref always has a value. If it doesn't have a value, it will initialize one for you. And so in this example,
I guess that's not true if you apply
correct,
filtering too.
correct.
Is why the other data type.
So like here, when we ask for the value of computed, it first initializes the ref, basically calls this map function, and that's how we get 2. If we change the value, the underlying value of the reference, the value of the computed value also changes. And then you're 100% correct. The filtered data type works, it's identical in every single way except for trying to retrieve a value. It's because you could have filtered it out, in which case you will get a no such element exception.
Which is in line with what you would get if yielding
Right,
something like
precisely.
an option.
And so the main, I guess I could, just for an example, you can filter map precisely that, and you'll get some sort of filtered. But the main thing is get typo. You'll see that when you try to retrieve it, you can get an exception of it being missing. And so this is actually the exact operation that's utilized in the router that I was saying. You'd have some route and you would match on it, and you'd end up with a filtered value of the parameters that the route matches to. But it may or may not be matched, which is kind of why you end up with this filtered data type. So from there, you can also kind of extend the router if you want to create a new one. Pretty much it takes the second route and it calls route.concat here to create a new router instance. And then these are kind of, they're not too important for most people's use cases, but kind of have, kind of build a tree structure of the routers. Just in case you want to do some sort of operation that like goes up the tree, figures out what all the routes are, and creates some sort of some sort of path based on all of that information, or if it's something I haven't done yet, but I like React Router, for example, you have the ability to put like relative paths, like dot dot slash, to kind of like move up. I would imagine being able to traverse up to the parents would kind of be relevant to those sorts of operations. And then the router is always built off of that navigation service. I don't think I'll dive into too deeply right now, but I put it here just so it's easy to reach there. And navigation has um, it has a lot of stuff going on that I won't go into too depth, but for the most part, you keep track of the current entry. You can navigate. You can listen to navigation events either when they're occurring.
This is sorry. This is the package that you refer to as it being built, inspired from
Correct.
the
I
navigation
hope
API.
in the future to be able to pretty much just switch to actually using the navigation API. Right now, I have two different implementations. I have one that works entirely in memory for server side experiences, and then one that uses the history API and kind of shims over that to work inside of the DOM environment. But it allows you to listen to these, like on navigation, there's this navigation error type you can utilize. You can either cancel the current navigation or you can redirect to something else. You can also listen to when the navigation has completed, if you need it for any reason. There's a couple other things. You can go back if there are any entries before the current one, actually going back, going forward, reloading the current entry. Something I think is actually kind of nice about the navigation API that's coming up is they kind of have this idea of, I don't know if they call them exactly the same thing, but you're able to, you have some sort of key type in every single destination that you make it to. Uh, they all have their own, let's see, they all have their own key associated to them. And so you can actually use those keys to navigate back and forward to these different destinations. And so currently I generate them on the fly. Um, and in the DOM environment, it's set up to store them in local storage so that so if you want to be able to store these keys for later and create experiences around being able to jump back to stuff or forward to stuff, I thought that was kind of a nice thing from the navigation API itself.
Yeah, I'm not yet familiar with the new navigation API. I have to be sincere in saying that I pretty much in my career have went as far as
Mm-hmm.
possible from front end. So I'm kind of getting in touch back. At the very early of my career, I was building front ends too, but I was never good at building front ends, and I found myself more passionate about staying away from user experience, which is kind of the opposite of what you describe yourself uh, to be in. But uh, I know that the web platform is making huge progress, and this is actually the first time that I hear about the navigation API, and uh, it has some very interesting
Yeah, it's
concepts. I see. And how hard was it to shim over
it
the
wasn't too
history
bad.
API?
And we can kind of poke through it. There's a fair amount of code in here. Um, I guess actually the more interesting stuff would be in here.
Is this seems to me more familiar? I mean, I've seen something similar in mobile, if I'm not mistaken. And Android
Uh,
has something similar to this.
you might be right. I'm
I
not.
might be
I'm
wrong,
not
but
positive. I've never done any native stuff. But it wasn't too terrible. I guess actually I should move here. So I kind of have like the shared model. It works for both the in-memory and the DOM implementation. Uh, in this case, I have to keep track of my own event handlers and stuff. These things would be handled natively uh, by the navigation API once it's available, or at least it has mechanisms at which I could more easily tap into rather than having to keep track of them myself.
Yeah, I mean, you would always want something of a service on top of that, as you described, to provide experiences in server side and I guess in
Yeah,
environments
precisely.
that don't support it. So it's probably gonna be easier to, well, you would need to shim less, but still a
Right.
bit of it,
And
yeah.
so the main two things that I actually keep state for are these two guys. I keep track of the navigation events, um, and I don't think I those are exposed to you at any point. The navigation event kind of has the most amount of data, but that's actually what I store to local storage in the DOM environment and stuff, so that I can I'll have like the keys and things of that nature to be able to navigate to and from. And then I keep track of what the current index is in this list as you go back and forward and things of that nature. Um, and then the rest of it's pretty much computed things. So the entries are computed from here. The destinations are kind of nested inside of a navigation event. The current entry is kind of the joining of these two things into this the currently zoomed in on destination. Can go back, basically checks if the index is um, greater than 0, and can go forward if the length of events is greater than the current index, more or less.
And I see that all of those are subject based, so you can observe changes to
Correct.
those
So
variables in real time, I
um,
guess.
like I have something I can't show, but I have an app at work. I stash these into some pagination controls. So if you can go back is true, I kind of use that to disable or enable that particular button. Change the styles so that it doesn't look like something you can click on, all that kind of stuff. Um,
Got it.
so, did you have any other questions? I don't know if I quite answered your question. But
No, 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 it's totally fine, and probably it's already
yeah,
in more details that other
yeah,
people are gonna be curious about. But
I'm
I'm
happy
I'm
to talk
picky on
about them. But
details, so
yeah, I kind of have like the shared model um, that kind of keeps. This is all the state that I really have to keep. And then I kind of have two different. I call them intent files. They're kind of the things that give me actions on top of um, the model, and more or less uh, the kinds of things that I had to sort of build on top of them is I kind of have to manage notification of events, notifications of the end of um, things happen. So uh, the current event didn't get canceled or it didn't redirect, and it was successful. You'll be able to get these notification ends, and the ability to save. Those are kind of things that I had to build into this on top of what the native navigation API would sort of give us. Um, and then I pretty much pass these three things into all of the other functions. So like saving saves the current events and the current index into storage. You can technically set it up to go into local storage or session storage since storage is generic. in some sense. But yeah, this is kind of where I keep track of things getting saved. I'm going to kind of gloss over some of this stuff.
Oh,
But pushing, um, there's some complications here. I have this. This is something that you would never use in your own app. I'm pretty sure it's hidden from you intentionally via the types. But I also sort of, I don't think I think I have it in here. But I have some stuff to be able to patch over the history API. But I have like, it's sort of a circular reference. I want to be able to allow, if you natively call history.pushState yourself, I want to be notified of it, such that the navigation state can be in the correct place when history events occur. And generally, I want the opposite to be true. I want to be able to allow the navigation API to push the history API. And so I kind of have some code in here to be able to detect if I'm calling this function from within the navigation API such that I don't send double events. So there's some, this is probably,
some
yeah,
weirdness
this is the
around the
best thing I
edges,
came up
yeah.
with so far, but it basically allows me to have be bi-directional by default, but sort of not get double events coming out of the navigation side of things when it decides to push events, or I guess it could even be circular in some sense. Okay, so any other questions here? I think I kind of went over the majority of it.
No, I'm good to go
So
to the
we were
next.
finishing up the router. So that's what makes, I just kind of nest this in here so that you don't have to always reach for the navigation. I'm kind of trying to make the router more of the user-facing kind of service that you would utilize. So you'll have access to navigating and everything else from within the router. But this is actually, because the navigation API does so much, this is the implementation of the router on top of it. So it really,
She's just basically
yeah, it's
plugging
pretty
together the various
small. And
pieces.
so using whatever the current entry is, I get the URL. The URL is always a full URL object in the navigation API. So in my case, I only care about what the path is, which also includes the hash and the query params. And then that gets passed down. I kind of hinted before. You have this filtered map that just kind of pushes the route in there.
Which is what generates a filter
Correct.
on the other end. Yeah.
And then this really just calls itself. And as I mentioned, it really just concatenates two routes and sets the parent. And that's really it. And in every, at least the way I have it right now, navigation will get like the base URL. So if you set a base element with an href in your HTML, it goes ahead and tries to grab it when you have it set up for the DOM. If you use the memory implementation, you have to provide it yourself if you need it for any reason. But it'll go ahead and try to grab whatever the base ref is to create the initial router. And there's some little helpers here for creating layers and things.
An in-memory router or
So I guess there's one more thing in here worth talking about. There's some other smaller things. I have, these types are a little scary because it has a shit ton of generics. Something that I'm starting to notice is like issue when I start to get to these higher level UI patterns. It's like I support, like in this case, I support the value. It needs to be some type of string, but it could be an effect of a string. It could be a stream of a string, or any of these different sorts of things. So my UR library has this type called placeholder that kind of represents all of these different things that the UI library that we'll get to supports.
Yes, this is the very same naming that we used in
That's
our initial
actually 100%.
prototypes um, of the HTML package, and comes from I guess, what was it, micro HTML,
Yeah, I actually
something like that.
100% stole this name from y'all. I changed. I, I changed a
Oh,
little bit.
nice.
I think yours, the one in Effect HTML, only supports the R parameter, um, and but
I mean, that to be honest was hacked from, like, we sort of did a kind of an initial hackathon with, not really a hackathon, but we focused on it for with Vessel for a few weeks, because we were really curious about, which I guess it's something we will look later. How much can we stretch template literals? And we actually found out that you can get very, very nice APIs out of it, and I was very impressed. But then we had to make 1.0 of Effect,
mhm.
which is now closed, we didn't really have the time to also explore the boundaries of a front end framework that starts from scratch, which is the reason why I'm actually extremely excited to see where this leads, because you clearly have spent a lot of time on this, way more than we
Yeah,
had.
probably more time than I should, but it's been a nice ride. But
You've mentioned an app at work.
yeah,
Do you
I
actually use this
have
already?
an
That's that's
app at
impressive.
work. I can. This is not the right one. See all these different things I use to test. Um, so we just started setting up. Actually, maybe I'll show the QA version because I have more things. Um, but yeah, this app is entirely built with this. Our loading screen. So we're starting to. I have a support level permissions, so the UI here is slightly different for people with different level permissions. Um, but for our internal,
Can this be shown, or should
I
I
think
cut it
it's
off
fine to
from
show.
the
There's
from the
no
stream?
industry secrets or anything here, but it is password protected, and no one will be able to get into it unless they start paying us and own a restaurant. But for like internal users, we just started building out search, and so currently the only way our search works is through our store goods. And this is because we're slowly porting an old internal tool, and I don't have endpoints for having a real search yet or anything, but we do have this. Starting to build out some of the UI, but
But I've seen that as soon as you type that in,
right.
the
And so
result
you can get
was
in once you're into like a particular store location, you can add, remove admins, and you can edit store information for different sorts of little things. Um, and then these are placeholders for at the moment. I hate them to death. My designer doesn't want them there, but product people wanted them to be here. um, I don't know why we have pages that do nothing. Um, what else? This guy, I don't know if I have anything ready to share here.
But it's
But
impressive
yeah,
that
this
you've
is
built
this
it
is that
already,
pagination
with
stuff
with
I
this
was
in
showing you
progress.
or talking about before. is it uses a similar pattern to be able to go forward, back, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, this is all written with this effect and typed private. But you can add all that kind of stuff. You get little error handling stuff. I'm not yet using effect schema. We still have an internal decoder library at my job that I maintain that is so pervasive at this point that I don't think we're ever getting rid of it. But yeah, number of different things going on. But I won't bore people with restaurant backend stuff. Using all of these things. So I was kind of starting to gloss over. You have like, these are sort of components for creating links. I didn't want to be too specific, so it kind of uses like a render prop sort of thing. I think I had in my example, I have like a list item link. You provide it some parameters, and it kind of exposes an API back to you. Which I guess this is sort of one of the first times we could talk about the HTML templating. So, as you mentioned before, I'm using the tagged template literal types. The reason for that, and I'm sure the same reason you guys started playing with it, is because they don't use like any sort of magic JSX namespace for resolving the types. And so this function, although it's very large at the moment and some of it's computed, it really knows what resources are being utilized inside of the template, and it's able to propagate those up, as well as the errors that are associated with them. And in my case, the HTML tag actually returns an FX or a push-based stream. And so that, in reality, for when you're rendering in the DOM, there will really only ever be a single event, because it's going to construct this LI, this list item, exactly one time. And then any values that are provided to it that are interpolated, that change over time, are mapped one-to-one to the value in which it uses. So, in this case, this URL could potentially change depending on what to value gave it. So if you gave the value 2 as a stream of hrefs over time, this href here will also change over time without re-rendering things. However, in the server environment, it will push out multiple events. So it'll first start by streaming out the list item and the start of this A tag. It'll wait for the URL to resolve. If it's not synchronous, it'll stream out this part. It'll skip this part.
Wait, does it
Yes.
do actual streaming from backend to
I do
frontend?
support streaming the HTML out. So,
Oh wow.
so if you'll, this is some tests that I have for the HTML stuff, but you give it a nice simple template, it'll push this stuff out. I have a function here below hidden away in this test HTML chunks. So each one of the templates is generated with a unique hash. So the hash is based on the template strings of the template, so they're deterministic, and it will set this data typed with whatever the value of the hash is. I have it set up in the test that it replaces it with ... so that I don't have to determine what the hash will be ahead of time. But it'll create.
Again, this is a test util. In real rendering, this would be exactly the hash. It would
Correct.
not be the
And
double point.
that's so that when I go to do hydration, I can utilize the DOM to figure out where things are. It helps me. I'm going to gloss over that a little bit more. But when you have things that are interpolated, it'll break things up. So it's smart enough to know I can stream this out immediately. And then as soon as the text is available, it's synchronous in this case. So it'll be very, very quick. It'll stream out the text that I just put in. This is a comment for text. So I found that in order for me to be able to ensure that this ends up being a singular text node, so like if you had, some text here,
Yeah,
right?
you gotta tokenize them
So I
somehow.
need to
So
make
you
sure
stitch
that
a
I
comment in
can get
between.
here and edit this directly. So I break them up with these little text HTML attributes. And then I also have these other sort of things. I think I stole from micro HTML. They're indexed. These sort of holes, they help me to be able to figure out in the template which values go where. And they help me find those things later on. And then, okay,
And
yeah, for sure.
just one question: using this kind of way of putting directly the attributes
Mm-hmm.
inside the DOM, we are not really using any like stringified JSON to preserve the data to rehydrate on the client. That's figured
Yes,
out
it
directly
is.
in the DOM.
There's
If I'm
nothing else serialized besides the HTML
nice.
itself. And so it's kind of my hope eventually. I'm nowhere near there. But I'm very inspired by like the quick front end framework with resumability and things. So I'm hoping to get somewhere closer to that in the future. But for now, I have just standard hydration for things on the client side. But as we get further down, um, this is something that took me a while to set up, but the ability to have multiple interpolations in a single attribute is something that micro HTML doesn't support, that I ended up adding some support for. Um, do we have anything more interesting? So yeah, you can sort of pass in streams and different things along the way. Yeah, let's get these things are more interesting. So I also have support for some directives. So there are different types of directives for the different types of attributes and things that you have. The main one, they all give you kind of access to some sort of part. You can create a generic directive and kind of switch over the tags of parts if you want to create something more interesting. But I think in all my examples, I use specific ones where they go. But they work in both the server and the client side. But they allow you to write some effects that end up being able to manipulate any part of the DOM or HTML as you see fit. Have them for attributes, for there's kind of this question syntax for Boolean attributes that I think I lifted from lit-HTML. And it would allow you to set true or false on these different things.
Which either
Correct.
adds it or removes it.
So when I set it to true, you end up seeing the hidden here. If you set it to false, you end up seeing it not there at all. And then I have like this one for class names. I don't think I have any examples to show it, The only reason I have this set up any different, needs to return the effect,
Because you gotta
is
return it, yeah.
you have some additional abilities to like, it's kind of like working with class list. You can add, move, and toggle class names as well. It kind of just gives you some extra APIs. And these return effects too, so they're not actually doing anything at the moment, but at least to illustrate, some of them have little extra APIs around them.
So all of those are effects. So you could just write a generator, yield them,
Yes.
add, remove, and so on and
I
so
haven't
forth.
updated this to the latest updates from effect just yet.
Yeah, sorry about this, but we've been breaking a little bit
And
of
it
code.
ended up being okay. I know my tests all passed because event directives get ignored. Well, events in general get ignored on the server. They're not serialized in any ways. They get attached later on in the DOM. There's also, abilities to get the current reference. So you'll be able to get a reference to this input element later on. You could even create sparse directives if you're feeling crazy for some reason. Yeah, this looks terrible, but it's possible. I just wanted to prove it to be possible. And you can do more interesting things. I have this really basic counter component stashed for some tests, and you'll see it. Even though it has events and things, it creates the correct HTML once it streams out. But it will try to send out any information that's ready as soon as possible, and it will wait. It kind of does some buffering. It'll end up running everything in parallel and then ensure that there's ordering. And it deals with nested templates. So if you have a template inside of a template, it'll wait for that template to finish streaming all of its parts before. Yeah, I
It'll
have a stream
unwind
operator
everything.
called merge buffer concurrently that I use. Totally open to better names, but that's what I came up with.
Do stuff in
Exactly.
parallel and
Ensure
merge it
ordering, but
later.
make sure it runs as fast as soon as possible. And then I have a counter of counters for no good reason. It's surprisingly good at testing a lot of these things. Like, it has just the right amount of dynamic behavior to test a lot of stuff. But I have, I guess this is a decent thing. There's a helper in the HTML library called Mini.
I
Yeah.
One question. I see a
Mhm.
fx.gen.
Great question. So, yes.
Good question. Okay, you
Yeah.
understood the question before I've
So
asked.
there is no,
How?
it's a bit of a lie. So it allows you to run some effects up front and then return an effects. So that's how I kind of get I have a setup thing for my component and then it returns a template. And so,
But isn't
yes, it
fx
is.
multi shot?
So this will actually only ever run once. So uh, let's go to that's good. So it calls effect.gen with the F because it returns a generator to an effects. Rather, so you're not yielding effects. You're yielding. That's hard to say. We're
You're
not
not yielding
yielding
the values.
streams.
You're
We're just
yielding
yielding
the
standard effect
producers.
TS stuff, and then you return the stream. And so from FX effect, It runs some effect. If there's a failure, it pushes it into the sink. And then on success, you'll have an effects, which I run and push into the same sink. And so that kind of allows me to use the generators, which I really like, um, for the setup. So I create like any references that I need, ask for any resources that I might want to utilize directly. And that isn't
Because then the
on the
multi-shot
return.
part is actually on the return value. Once you've multiplexed everything, then that thing
Right.
will
And
actually
so you
go on
get
and
sort of like a
got it.
component-ish life cycle. You get like the startup that you control, and then uh, the rest is set up over time. But that's a good question.
Which I guess it begs the second question, which is the setup never runs twice. So if you have any conditional or anything else, it's gonna be part of the template, not part
This is
of the
correct. You
bootstrapping
also, it
logic.
pushes that further down, um, which is probably different from a lot of things. And yeah,
It's for sure different from React, but I've seen other frameworks taking a similar approach. And I have to say I kind of agree because you separate the logic from the wiring up, and it makes the state management way more clean. At least that's how I would do it as a backend developer, or a way that I understand it more. It's kind of like, what was it, Solid, that takes a similar
yeah.
approach.
So
I might be wrong here,
yeah,
but
they end up
I've read it
they
somewhere.
use, I think it's a Babel transform or some sort of transform, a compiler of sorts, to take JSX and their signals and be able to update the DOM directly. So yeah, there's definitely some similarities in that, in the way that those work. Uh, the main differences being we have all of effect available to us, so we have typed errors and the typed context as well, and no compiler necessary.
No compiler necessary, yeah, which is a big win in my
Um,
view.
I guess also while we're just looking at this, so there's kind of, for event handlers, you can provide an effect directly. So in this case, this is an effect that will update this state, either increment or decrement it. And then there's also another API event handler, which will allow you to get access to the event, and you can
Where you get
provide
access to
like
the actual event, yeah.
different event listener options and such. But I honestly, I find myself using the shorthand of just providing an effect there all the time. I don't. Only sometimes I have those events with,
I guess when you need access
right. Yeah,
to the element, like an on change
exactly, and when you need the
on a
value from the
text.
target element and that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, I was starting to get. I have like this mini helper, um, and this is kind of like there isn't any like built-in support for keyed values, so it kind of gets pushed up onto the stream abstraction. Is that the stream abstraction needs to keep track of life cycles of components and things of that nature. Because for as long as that stream is alive, that's like a single component instance. We don't want to like be tearing it down and then spitting it back up all of the time. This is really contrived because it's only using indexes based on the count. Um, but here you provide some sort of stream of an array of some value. It can be any value a, um, and then for each one of those values, uh, you'll actually get um, a ref subject of those values. So
An
this is where
observable subject.
I kind of take a stream of arrays, create a ref subject for every instance of those values, and when they just those values just change, it gets pushed in here so that
So this is what, for example, allows you to do a single change instead of
precisely.
replacing the full
Um,
array.
and it also kind of has what I found is like in that table that I have um, in that little app at work, it also kind of stands in as a place where I can put changes that are local first, so I can like kind of mutate that without affecting the outside world. And then at some future point, like when like the input is blurred, I actually submit it uh, up through a service to actually change the kind of global state, if you will. So I kind of abuse it a little bit as like a local state thing. So I don't have to instantiate yet another ref subject for that, and try to keep those two things in sync. And then the third function is how you get some sort of ID. So if you had something more interesting, you might do ID or key or
I guess that needs to serialize to
correct.
something that you can push on a string.
Uh, it really just needs to be something. I can't remember what the hell I use. Can't remember if I use a hash map or a regular map. I think it's a regular, like a standard ES map at the moment. So by
Okay,
ref
so something that compares by value, even if it's with three
precisely.
equals.
Um, but yeah, I don't think I have anything else right here in this part of it.
I see one test which is runs fast. And I'm curious to ask how fast does this thing actually run?
I don't even know.
'Cause I know you're
I
crazy for
I don't think I've
performance,
really
but
spent a whole lot of time on performance here. I actually think some of my latest changes have made it a little bit worse than it was at one point. Um, uh, where are we? We're in the HTML package. Let's see if it actually runs only that. I've come to find that I don't know if it's the index or if it's vtest or what have you. Um, but yeah, currently it takes to render this counter of counters to HTML. So this streams it out and then concatenates them all back into um, a singular string. Um, it runs 100 times, and I guess the average render time takes 9 milliseconds to create a counter of counters, which starts off with only having a single nested counter. Uh, I think there's definitely some cost to having nested templates, the way that it's doing all the buffering and everything. There's definitely some performance overhead. Um, so I don't know if we consider this fast. I haven't decided this is actually fast, but that's what it's just what I hope to have this thing capture. I just wanted to know on average how quickly does this thing actually run, so I can.
I mean there are folks that are hitting for like 120 hertz, something like that, which gives you like 4 milliseconds of available time for a
Right.
frame drop. So this is fairly fast for my understanding of 30 fps, 60 fps, but probably to get to the point of actually.
But also, this template isn't anything crazy, and so it will slow down as you have larger and larger and larger. There's just more work to be done, and I think there's probably a lot of room for optimization still.
But this is, again, this
Correct.
is first render. Changing something, then
That's
it's not
correct.
gonna
So
re-render everything.
as soon as things start up, so this is just for the HTML, like on the server side, it would pump out all of this HTML in approximately 9.6 milliseconds. The hydration would kind of take over On the client, there's definitely some boot up time there. Um, I haven't quite gotten into like really optimizing how that functions just yet. And part of that's because it's so opaque to me at the moment because it's all in the effect runtime. It's hard for me to figure out which parts of my code are taking a long time and which aren't. So I haven't quite gotten there. And I think that's where the most expensive part is like booting up on the client the first time. Um, but I don't know, at least for a lot of the things that I've built, like the app that I quickly demoed, uh, I've tried to optimize that. You're going to make it to the sign-in page first every single time. So as long as that's really, really quick, that feels good. Uh, everything that comes subsequent to that is going to be really quick because I don't have to do quite as much work to change templates or update parts of the DOM. It all gets very localized.
I guess it's one of the advantages of using this
Precise.
signal like design. You really never get to update the full thing. You know precisely what changed, where, and you just hit the
Yes.
single thing.
The only exception
This
to
is really
that, where
nice.
there's like literally an O1, like this attribute, this node, etc., is where it still maintains that O1 notation, is when you have lists of things. So, like in this example, we end up with a list of counters nested in divs for no good reason, but um, only in the case of having arrays of values. And so this could even be, you know, an array of DOM nodes. I don't know. I'm just going to do it real quick. Don't do this in real life. Um, and then for some reason, if you had a stream of these things and they moved in order or anything of that nature, that's the only time I have to do diffing, is when you have lists of values, and it will try to do the best thing uh, to reorder.
Again, on the case where they're not keyed, so where you don't have a direct
Correct. It's the only
access
time.
point.
Um, and they do pop up, but it performs really well. It does it directly against the DOM nodes. Uh,
Well, considering that other frameworks do a full diff on the full, not DOM, but virtual abstraction of the DOM, not doing diffing 90% of the
Pretty good.
cases seems a good way.
Right.
Seems a good thing for performance.
Um, so yeah, that's okay. I don't know. These were the tests that I have for server rendering. I think probably not worth a lot of looking at. There are a lot of the same tests, just set up differently to deal with the DOM, like almost identical. Um, I'm pretty much just checking that the DOM ends up looking the way that I expect it to. Usually means it mirrors whatever the template was. But again, yeah, you can pass effects anywhere that you want, they'll resolve. You can pass streams anywhere that you want, they'll resolve.
And to be clear here again, just for the sake of the viewers, anytime you pass in an effect or a subject or an FX value, it's gonna carry over environment errors and so on and so forth. It's gonna bubble up, so you could do like typed context in React terms that you see explicit at any point of your app that you have to explicitly provide,
Right.
and,
And
and
not
so on
just
and
the
so forth.
context, but also errors. So if your event handlers provide have some sort of errors, they'll also be passed through and out of your component for handling, whether you want to show a loading screen when certain kinds of errors come up or display some sort of fallback when those errors come up. Those are also fully typed. and never swallowed.
That looks
Uh,
incredible.
so I guess we're building up. Kind of talked about the path stuff. We talked about routers. We started talking about HTML stuff. And that's kind of the crux of a lot of it. There are some smaller things that are built in here. We have this DOM package, typed DOM. Uh, it's pretty close to just an effect wrapper of the DOM. So like when you get in here, uh, there's a tag for the document, some common things. It's almost all effect except for event listeners. Event listeners do use my stream library here, um, the effects data structure. And for anybody, I don't think I've mentioned this, but for people out there listening, I chose the word effects because I don't like typing very much. And then it's also sort of a play on the pluralization of effect. So kind of moving from single shot to multi shot. At least that's kind of how it worked in my head. I don't know if it translates out very well.
I definitely agree with you that I don't like to type a lot. In fact, in my code,
Sure,
effect is called T for a very peculiar reason. I publicly say it's because it's the short name for
sure.
tasks. That's false, actually. That's not the reason. The reason I call it T was because there was the notation on the original paper that Eugenio Moggi introducing
Mm.
monads for the first time. He called monad T. So that's why I call everything T. But yeah, that was just a curiosity. I like short names.
Yeah, without a doubt. As long as they still convey something.
Well, in my case, it doesn't.
Well,
It does
it
not.
is
But
attached to something here at the top, right? Like I have a C here. It's not super useful, um, but yeah, I can pretty much gloss over this. There's different things if you're working with the document. If you're working with event targets, you can add event listeners. You can deal with global this. There's some access to fetch. It's a little bit of stuff here. Um, helpers like trying to get JSON from it and things of that nature. Trying to standardize some of this stuff with like little errors, attaching them with the request that you had made, and things of that nature. I used to have an integration with Effect Query before Effect took in all of that functionality, and I haven't quite
got
gotten
it
back
natively.
there. But it's something I want to definitely add back at some point. The ability to batch, kind of at the fetch level. Um,
And I guess just to share where we are heading, we are making a
yes,
platform package that will include HTTP wrappers, hopefully with
everything.
caching and batching by default. So hopefully
Delete this.
you're gonna be able to literally remove, delete that portion of code. Hopefully, if you're not, then provide feedback because it means we are not covering some very common
I can't
functionalities.
imagine
But yeah,
too much of
definitely
it being
you need
different.
some
Like
wrappers.
what I have here is so basic. Uh, I actually don't even use this stuff yet, so it's kind of more of like a well, the DOM has fetch, and I should probably have fetch. uh, but yeah, I would be totally happy to switch that stuff
That's
out.
indeed the case.
Um, some really boring things to get the global this value, but it was very much an intentional goal from the start for me to ensure that not a single part of this library utilizes globals. So effect helps a lot in this. So every single thing is passed in as a service somewhere, and can be changed, modified. And so in like the server environment, you could use Happy DOM or JS DOM or some other shim to provide these things. And, your code will be none the wiser. Um,
I guess that's very, very important when it comes again to testing and to provide different implementations without actually having a lot of branching within the code, which detects, am I in a frame, am I in a testing environment, am I not in a testing environment, do I have to behave this way, that way,
Absolutely.
and so on
And
and so forth.
to further that goal, something I did get to gloss over, uh, there is the HTML library utilizes this thing called a render context, and it will also you instantiate it to say what environment you're in, and then there are some helpers like when you're in a browser, do this, otherwise do that. When you're in a server, do this or do that. When you're static rendering, I don't quite have everything set up to really do static rendering, but it's to do
You're gonna get there.
soon, hopefully. But let me get back over here. So you have access to the current environment if you want to do anything that's conditional. And then I also have this flag in here whether or not the current request that you're handling is a bot. So I have code at work, um, and we have it crawled by Google all goddamn day. And it accounts for like 99% of our traffic is Google pounding the shit out of us. And there are some things that we don't want to do when it is a bot. For instance, we have some monitoring and user tracking that's fairly expensive to boot up. And so, and we don't want to
And you
pay for
probably
it
don't want to
to
do
be
it if it's
booting
a
up
bot.
when it's not for a real user. So we I added this flag in there to kind of capture one of my own use cases. There's certain things I don't want to do when there's a bot. And you might want to serve up, some sort of statically rendered version ahead of time or anything of that nature. Kind of have that stashed in there. And then these are hidden from you intentionally, but this is where I keep track of. Um, this will usually be a DOM node, and then it keeps track of some information about what's been rendered there before, so it can determine whether or not it needs to do anything or if it needs to replace the child or things of that nature. And that really only has
I guess those two are the contexts that in micro HTML you had global,
correct. They
if
were
I
entirely
remember
global
correctly.
weak maps. So
We had the same kind of render context where when we were about to initially experiment on effect HTML for this precise reason, keeping metadata around
yeah,
rendering
so in
and
practice there will
templates.
really only ever be one, but for tests and other things, you don't have to worry about things mismatching. And then this is to keep track of the information that I parse about an individual template. And so it's slightly different. Well, it's different between the server and the DOM, and then it's slightly different. That's why I have it as unknown here. I do some typecasting some other places, just kind of why I made it internal. But hydration and then like standard rendering from scratch have slightly different representations, and there's some graceful handling for like when after you've done hydration and it switches to doing like standard rendering, it deals with the fact that they change a little bit and all that kind of stuff.
Maybe just
Mm-hmm.
a very small advice: whenever you do this stuff with internals, stitch a symbol on the type
People grab
so you avoid people actually trying to provide the same type with the same fields and then opening up issues. This doesn't work. Well, it wasn't, you were not supposed to do this. At least there's a symbol that it's only local, they cannot access the symbol. uh, if they try to do so, then they can read that there is also two internal fields that they should provide.
Yes,
And
I
I,
am.
I was there before, so that's
I
that's the
definitely
small
appreciate
advice.
your advice. I've kind of avoided those things because something that I really hate about using libraries like React is like I have no escape hatch. I have no control over 90% of what the framework does. So I think
You should have
that's
escape
been something I
hatches.
really want in here. So like, even though I've described all this stuff that I built, uh, you could replace your own router at will. Um, this HTML library also supports DOM nodes from any framework anywhere. So you can nest React apps in here, Svelte apps, you name it. It's totally happy as long as it can accept DOM nodes or HTML strings, or depending on the environment. So there's a good amount of interoperability if you need to do ports, piecemeal. You don't have to, it's not all or nothing. And then it also only ever produces the same things, DOM nodes and such. And so as long as these other frameworks support those in some fashion, you can also kind of go in the other direction pretty well. The app that I did at work, I did in that in that sort of pattern. I implemented certain pages at first with typed, and then eventually doing a little bit bigger of a refactoring to kind of replace the app shell with it as well. It wasn't too bad. So that's something I've tried to keep in here, is like these little escape hatches. I don't know what anybody would ever do with these, but I'm sure they'll figure it out.
I mean, like usually, for example, if I use a symbol
Yeah,
to avoid a user directly implementing the type they're on, I usually use a symbol where I specify the dot .4. So
right.
if you actually want it, you can get the same symbol,
Yeah,
and you
something.
can, like, it's not. I use symbol dot .4. It's flagged as a unique symbol. It's gonna use
Yeah, something like that.
some sort of stuff like that. So, but no, I meant it that it's apparent at the type level, uh, because otherwise this type in userland is equal to a string environment and an isBot. The two internals get removed from the type at all, so you would be able to provide a render context just providing those two. And especially if users do stuff like
Right.
higher order things, maybe they spread, it's kind of risky. I know while developing you shouldn't care about any of those, and and probably you should not care about any of these for a while, up until the point where
Sure.
you actually want people to use it. But when you get to that point, it's like, make them hard, and make things they should
Right.
not do hard to do. That's the trick.
Right.
Still make them doable, because you need the escape hatches as you've described, but
Right.
a bit harder. Anyway, those are just small advices from person who's been fighting with people exploiting their libraries as much as
That's, you give it
possible.
to users, and that's what they do.
You give it to users, that's what they're gonna do, and be sure it's the same
And yeah,
thing I
I
would
have
do.
like little helpers
So
if you for the synchronous versions of the other things that we have. You can check to see if what environments you're in, or if the current environment's a bot, kind of stuff. Um, so we talked about most of the
well,
stuff, I think. We kind of hit on the DOM library. I have, I don't know, I think the only other one that maybe is of interest to some people is I have some wrappers around uh, affect data context. And actually, I want to, it's here. Pretty much, I just kind of wrap it in some additional methods so that I kind of, I have the tag in one place and I don't have to also look for like affect flat map and all these other things along the way. So it pretty much just hides a lot of that stuff away from you. But you can, yeah, I have like these actions that you can have, which basically allows you to get the service and either perform apply a function, perform an effect, perform a push-based stream,
An
providing
effect, apply an
the
effects, yeah.
resources, constructing layers from them. And I have this other thing called a context builder, which just kind of gives you a fluent API for adding, like if you're constructing some sort of context, just kind of gives you like add methods and merge methods and things of that nature.
I guess for layers we are even evaluating if to have
Mm-hmm.
a small fluent API for layers. Just for tags in general, not really, because
Right.
they are very general. But to an extent, we made them a subtype of effect. So I'm still in the middle, but I do understand these in the context of a framework where you leverage those at every single line and so on and so forth. It
Yeah, I
becomes
kind of
probably
like
more
being able to say,
important.
I have this service, and then being able to just use it directly with this service. And I kind of
Yeah.
like the way it reads as well. It doesn't get hidden as much, um, which kind of leads to one interesting thing, I think. Uh, I don't know if other people have kind of fallen into this stuff. Um, but sometimes I really like, I want to work with two different services or three different services all at once. And so, given that I have these sort of methods, um, I can also sort of combine them. So I get this like tagged type. I called it tagged. I don't know. It's not a great name, but you can create tuples of services. So these are just, I think, these are technically the ones that I have that already have the different methods on it, but um, it could be just one directly from effect data context. It doesn't have to be one of mine, but you can kind of create tuples, but uh, it allows you to kind of work with them as if they're one thing. I kind of have it here. Also have it for structs if you want to do it with structs for any reason. Um, but it allows you to access them all at once and also provide them all at once.
And you do that at the tag level, so not by converting them to effects.
Correct.
Got it.
And and then I also have one other one I'll zoom in on that I use quite a lot. It's probably easier to see an example. So I end up creating services around an individual function all of the time. And so I kind of have this helper called function fin, and it takes in any kind of function to an effect. Kind of have this weird syntax for type inference, where you provide the type that you want to work with first, call a function, and then provide some sort of identifier, and end up with this function type. I'll break this apart so you can kind of see. So this ends up being, it gives you an API to apply.
You use the literal type as the
Correct. And
identifier
I have a
instead
little
of the
helper
function.
if people care enough. I don't even end up using it very often. It should be a class called ID. Uh, I don't want all that. I can't type. Um, and the key thing about that, I think I have the types for this. Oh, no, I haven't changed it yet. Well, I have the intention to be able to make them opaque via this. And the key thing about this is that it's the same type, has the same shape statically as it does at runtime. So you can provide the constructor, but use the type of the instance. So you get that sort of opaqueness.
Okay, so I guess if here, for example, you say read only get whatever that is an effect, that's the shape of the service, and you use the constructor as
Correct.
the literal
I guess I
type.
need to add support for the function to do that, but that's kind of the idea that I'll eventually get to. But you're able to kind of call it almost like a function. You have apply. Also, sort of has some support for generics. So the problem is here is that it has no idea what it is. And so I've been getting around that with if you actually want to, if you needed to call it, you can kind of access the function itself and you won't lose the generics. I could make this whatever. Uh, get back to where we were. But then it also kind of adds the ability to implement these things. And so that's kind of where I do a little bit of type level stuff. So by default, because this is never, my implementation can never have any resources of its own. And so there's a little bit of type level stuff that basically changes never to any in the process of providing it, so that you can add additional resources during the implementation and it will push it back on. So I don't know.
But I guess at that point you also have to
Right. And
provide
then
those.
you have to push them down. No, let's put this back where it was.
Yeah, but even if you push them down, I mean that function, that provide implementation, has to take the context from the outside and push it in the inside. Otherwise,
Correct.
it's
So
gonna be unsafe.
exactly where are we? So when it'll create the layer. It gets the context from outside, and then yeah, it produces the function, it provides the context. And the types
Got
don't
it.
work out super great. TypeScript doesn't know what the fuck's going on,
I can,
but
I
it
can
does work
imagine
pretty
that.
well,
Yeah.
and I use it absolutely all the time. And then you can also, if you prefer, you can create layers with just the implement. You kind of have this shorthand to provide it directly to an effect. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of the gist of things, kind of where I'm at. Kind of going forward, I'm really looking towards uh, these virtual module things that I think you and I have talked about just briefly. But I'm sort of trying to utilize virtual modules as a sort of macro almost. So you kind of say um, some sort of prefix or postfix or however you want to define these things, but some sort of tokens in your import module specifiers. Um, so, like for example, um, you might do like HTML colon. It's kind of how I'm doing HTML modules. Point it towards an HTML file, and then it will create a TypeScript module for that, in which you can import. And so that's how I intend at some point to sort of create server-side rendering, and one that works both in the development environment, which is slightly different than how it works in the production environment, but kind of make that seamless for you, so you don't have to understand the differences between them. Also, ones that kind of like go through a directory of routes and the functions that render with them, and kind of building up larger.
I was about to mention file system based
Right.
routing, but in a type safe
And it's
in
able
a
to
type safe
generate the
manner.
types. So uh, it creates like an as const of all of these different things. So it's able to correctly infer, like if I import this whole directory and stitch them together this way, they still have all of these requirements and they still produce all of these errors. so they don't get hidden or.
So if you let me maybe summarize it in a minute, and please correct me if I'm wrong. If we see it in 5 years in the future, I don't know how long it's gonna take, but let's say 5 years in the future, just to avoid any
Sure.
artificially made deadline, or give our users any intention of then asking you next month, where is this, where is this. The idea would be, you install the framework,
Hmm.
we end up calling it, and you create some files, you write things that look very much similar to normal HTML in template literals. You stitch
Hmm.
effects into it, or strings into it, and you run it, and it works in the server and in the client smoothly, as you would expect um, any new generation framework to do.
Yes and no. So everything you said is correct, but there's kind of some small caveats to it. So there isn't really like going to be a framework that like magically did all of that for you in some sense. So there are kind of I don't really have I don't have any examples of the virtual modules. Currently, I have this kind of stitched together by hand, but to illustrate, you might have like something like this. It's like we're creating a browser build for, let's say I have this pages directory that has all my routes and everything. And instead of having to stitch these things together, I might just have like root element, and it would do a lot of the stitching for you. You wouldn't have to provide all of these different things. But it would stack. Correct.
But you still control
And
domain.
that's something that I
You have
found really
control of, yeah.
important, is that I don't want to make all of these decisions for you. You have like this blessed underscore app.ts or underscore, like all of these like sort of private things to allow you to get into the framework. I don't want the framework to ever have that inversion of control. So here, browser might be very high level, where it gives you like just this render function and you tell it where to render, and it provides all the resources, does all the right stuff. But you might have something lower level like router, and you have some router instance, and it's like, okay, well, I want to do a lot more different things. I want to provide different versions of the resources. Um,
So rather an unbundled framework that you can
right.
easily
And
access
it's
and
also
plug
being built in such
into
a
it.
way that you can create your own virtual modules, and they'll maintain the type safety of putting them all together. It really just creates a TypeScript file behind the scenes. So I actually have one example of what I've been testing with the HTML. It ends up generating a TS file, but it ends up pulling in all of the content. Um, it tells you what placeholder it's. This is configurable. You can tell it where to find, kind of where to split. Where am I going to stream content into this thing? And so currently I'm using this comment typed content.
Through these, you should then be able to like import markdown
Yes.
files,
If you choose,
MDX,
it
stuff
should be
like that.
totally possible. I'm not quite there yet, but
If you choose to do so, of course.
and I have a bug here where it's not splitting the content yet. I'm still working on that. But this would be like I would stream this stuff immediately. I would render your application, and then this should be all the text that comes after this, um, and then it would stream the rest of it, and then close the response. And different things, and there'll be more things in here, like what is the base path if there is one. I try to parse that out. It'll have things like the asset directory, like where do you serve this thing from, so that like when you go to production, you can set up, if you need to, you can set up like static file servers and stuff of that nature. Um, but yeah, this is all generated. and hopefully going to get a lot better, and hopefully get some feedback into how all this stuff works and how other people might be using it. Um, but yeah, there's always going to be that level of control. There isn't going to be some all-knowing top-level process that does all of this stuff for you. But there are a lot of helpers along the way. So it doesn't do a whole lot yet, but kind of built on, I have this a CLI package, which has a couple different commands, which are probably easier to see. So I kind of have this alias to it, but for yourself, you might do something like npx typed, and then there's build command, which will build it for production. There's a preview command, which will spin up a local server for that production build without anything, and also with the serve. So these are equivalent. It's going to create a
which is gonna serve
for
the
local
build.
development. I currently use Vite for that sort of stuff, and it has a Vite plugin, which it does a few things for you at the moment. It configures tsconfig paths as one of the things that it does. And I also use another library by, I think his name's Psycho 13 or 31, and I'm probably butchering that, on GitHub. It's a package called Vavite, Vavite, and it helps teach Vite how to do server-side rendering. So you're able to use the Vite development server to serve both your server and your client, which leads to some boilerplate at the moment, which I hope to abstract over. But you get access, you can actually, through imports, this Vavite gives you access to the HTTP dev server and the Vite dev server that it's going to be running in. And this needs a lot of abstraction, so nobody look at this with any, I hope, but it's very much a
Yeah,
work
it's
in
work in
progress.
progress. Come on.
But like in prod, you might serve static files. I have one virtual module that is working already. You can get the configuration that you passed in. Well, not actually, it's the resolved configuration. So given what you provided to the Vite plugin plus sets of defaults, you're able to get access to things about the build. So like, where am I going to output all of the client files? And so like for production, I read the version of the index.html file that Vite already did transformations for and set up. So there's no need to do that sort of stuff again. And there's slightly different versions for running it in development versus prod. So in dev, one thing is Vite does a singular transform of your index.html to add, like module preloads and the right resources and things of that nature to a particular file. So we have to render the UI to a HTML string to be able to do it there. But in production, we're able to stream out the content that comes before, immediately stream out the UI, and then end it with the HTML that comes after your application. And I'm hoping to abstract quite a lot with virtual modules, and maybe another typed package, typed express or something along those lines. In a
Which
much
puts
more
together everything
digestible format.
in in a digestible format.
Yeah.
Yeah. While still you have the ability of hooking into every single component if you want to. If you don't want to, you use the prepackaged uh, stuff, and you start
Right, and you
fairly
can
easy.
pick up any of the libraries ad hoc. The most likely thing is that you're going to get a typed effects dependency somewhere along the way, if that doesn't mind bother people. That's kind of,
Good, good, good. Well, that
yeah, that's
was
pretty much
very
it.
exciting.
Thanks for thanks for the interest, honestly.
Thanks for doing this. I mean, I'm very curious about what people are building, and this is for sure one of the most low level usages of effect at the moment. And I'm really curious to see where this goes. But there are some fundamentals that we really agree with. That's, for example, usage of plain TypeScript, avoiding abstractions such as JSX, such as virtual DOM and stuff like that when where they're not strictly necessary, and also as a kind of, you mentioned before the resumability of quick and stuff like that. I do think there's a lot to explore there, and I'm very happy that you're gonna explore, if that is possible. Again, as you described it, and the reason we did this stream, it's to catch leading edge users, and not yet to really state this as a production ready framework or as the way that we choose to do things. But there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and we agree on some very fundamental patterns. So I my hopes are very high, and that's why the interest. I hope you catch a lot of bleeding edge
Yeah.
users. For sure, we have some in our community. I'm already impressed, to be honest, by the fact that you use these in a work app. I think all good projects starts that way. Uh, Effect started while I was CTO in a fintech company, and it started as a module of a production app that we had to use, and we dog fooded ourselves into all the patterns, and that's how you're gonna discover the rough edges and everything else, and hopefully if it works well for you, there's the good chance that it's gonna work well for others. So also on the strategy, I
Yeah, I'm
definitely
definitely dog
agree.
fooding pretty hard. I had like a month of period time where I had so many bugs in my stream library that I was stressing. Like I was ready to pull my hair out. I was I just had this like weird bug where it was like sometimes I get the event, and sometimes I don't, and I like don't understand why. It ended up being I had two concepts of a stream ending.
I call them the Eisenberg box.
Oh man,
Sometimes they are there,
it was
sometimes they're
just the
not.
worst. It was like sometimes I could click on this link and it would go, but if I go from this link to that link, no chance. And it was just like this shouldn't be happening. Um, but yeah, I'm kind of past that. Like I had a version that had virtual modules. I had a version that had all of this stuff at one point. My dog fooding said everything you just did is garbage. More like there's some bones in there,
Start
but
again.
like it's pretty bad. And so we're at that point now where I have the dog fooding lessons pointing me in the right direction. So I'm trying to revisit these virtual modules. My biggest limitation before was it forced everything that came out of the virtual modules to have no resources and no errors. They had to be handled. And so it kind of ended up in this weird position where it was putting together all these layers and things for you, but uh, sometimes they had to be provided more than once and all the time. And really, you want to share them at the top of your application and different things of that nature. And so that's where I'm kind of at now. Is I want TypeScript to actually understand what you're building. And so I'm trying to build a TypeScript plugin to fill that need. And I'm hopefully trying to do it in a way that people outside of Effect would also be able to utilize the virtual modules. I think it's just a pretty general approach to generating file content.
Well, I'm definitely curious to see where the virtual modules come through. I have tried it once before myself. I have not succeeded, but I did not spend enough time and enough dog fooding efforts to actually try to get there seriously. So I definitely hope this is gonna work, and it's gonna work well. The fact that you already use it in, like, for configs and other stuff makes me think that
I
it's
have,
actually gonna work. Uh, but it is gonna be the user experience that I want to use. I create a file, I have the types, and so on and so forth. Not too many hurdles around.
yeah, I almost think of them like as macros. They're like import macros. uh, so almost,
To
I
some
mean,
extent,
you can
probably.
generate anything you want. So we'll see how it's used.
Good, good, good. Again, Tyler, thank you very much for this. I will make sure to publish this as soon as possible in the community, and I hope you get feedback from users. That, again, we have a lot of bleeding edge folks. I hope they try it, and I hope they give you honest feedback on all the pieces. I will try it myself. I play around with it a little bit, and I try to do the same. Again, bear in mind I'm not a
It,
front end developer, so
that
definitely
might be the
ignore
best
most
kind
of
of
the
feedback.
feedback. I don't know. There are some patterns I really don't understand, and not in your framework, but generally in front end development. And I don't know if it's me or if it's the practice that took a strange direction during years, because I sort of left front end for 7 years. I started programming like 15 years ago. For the first 7, I was
Right.
doing both. Then too many things came up, and I sort of shifted my focus on the backend aspects. When I came back, now there's a war of frameworks, virtual DOMs everywhere, and many things I struggle to understand if they are necessary or if they are there just because they are there. In the sense that we started in a direction
Yeah,
and we
I think
continue
we've been
in
going
that
in a
direction.
direction where it's just like ad hoc adding. It's like I created this thing and it does this stuff, but now I have these problems. So let's build something else
But then
to
it has
alleviate this, but now there's like these other edge cases. So let's build a thing that's, and I think we're starting to get to that place where frameworks are starting to reevaluate. Um, like we have Solid, which is like, do we really need a full virtual DOM? Do we have Quick, which is like, do we need hydration? Do we need all of these different things? Can we split stuff up more naturally? And so I think we're starting to see that switch of like,
and I really like it. And in fact, I'm progressively getting more interested. I've been watching some of the talks that Mishko did on Quick. I've given it a very quick try myself, but I really like that we are evaluating the basics, because sometimes
yeah,
basics are wrong. And if you don't, like, to me, every year or two you have to kind of clear up your mind and say, okay, does the
right.
assumption make sense? And if the assumption no longer makes sense, you should try a different road and
Yeah, absolutely.
see where it
I
leads.
think I
So
really want to
very happy for
at
this.
some point. I kind of want to get to like a V1 of sorts before I start trying to figure out resumability again. But I'm pretty sure Effect is going to make it so much nicer. So I don't know if you're familiar with how Quick does some of this stuff, but to be able to pull, but to be
To
able
an
to pull
extent,
certain functions out of scope and to be able to still lazy load them and all this kinds of stuff, it relies on global variables extremely heavily. So it's able to push things into a global scope, call the function, it uses the things, so that you can split all of this stuff apart. And most of it gets put into like another file, so you can lazy import it. Um, and so effect context is like a godsend here. It's like I can create some service that nobody else will ever have, pass in a bunch of function arguments. Yeah,
with no global whatsoever, as
right.
long
I
as
have
you
no
know you
worries
have an
about
effect
concurrency.
runtime.
I have, global variable names clashing, any of those sorts of things. So I think once we get there, we're going to find ourselves a little bit easier of a pattern. The main thing is like the syntactic analysis of like, okay, here's the thing that I want to pull out, and then what are the dependencies of it, and generating those services and then passing them in.
Well, unfortunately, for something like that, you will need
Yes,
a custom compiler. It's no longer the place where it's standard TypeScript. But I also believe that at that point, it's sort of justified. Uh, like, I don't see why a custom compiler to write HTML personally. Uh, that's why I didn't really like JSX much. I've used JSX. I've used it for years because otherwise you couldn't really build any sort of
right.
UI in a decent manner. But I would like to write that part in plain TypeScript as you are doing. But I do think when you get to the point of slicing code, yes, that's where you actually need a compiler. That's pure
Yeah,
TypeScript
absolutely.
is not gonna get it there. It's not
So we'll see
not
where
not,
it
not
goes.
possible.
I would honestly like to use JSX.
Good, good, good.
So one of the consequences of not using JSX is like I don't have by default any type safety on the attributes of a particular element. Whereas in like JSX, it's something that comes really easy. You just have to define an object type, and here are all the properties and the values. And so I think that's something I have to address via like an ESLint
I've heard
plugin or other things.
I've heard different opinions on these. Some folks are like, yes, but that's not really necessary to type check arguments. But generally, I do think one could even build, like, if you're hooking into a TypeScript lifecycle to make the compiler plugin for modules and stuff like that, you're still gonna run on a quote unquote fork of uh, of TypeScript. And in this quote unquote fork, one could check the
Yes.
HTML. Might sound crazy, but one could actually check the HTML. And to some extent you are already doing it because you have the parser to then create DOM elements. So like if you do that on a synthetic version, you're gonna realize if there are errors on the template literals. Then it's a matter of getting it back to the
Yes.
user experience while you type, where you would need a lot of help. But again, I'm not against JSX per se. Uh, it got added to the language, but if you're like, it sounds like a stretch. Like, why then I can't use class? I have to use class name. There, there's some weirdness around the edges that, again, not being a front end by any reason, I don't know why they are there, but it's something that if we start challenging, I I'm excited to see where it leads. It might lead back to JSX by all means. We might discover that that was the best solution for all
I guess
for
we'll
all the
see.
problems. Who
I would
knows?
love, I'd love to have the AST
I
and
guess we'll
stuff
see.
from the TypeScript and everything. You could do more transformations and optimizations and stuff, but otherwise, at least in its current form, it's just poorly typed, and I can't deal with it. That's the end of the day right now.
Let's see. Maybe you end up writing a proper typed JSX, and we're gonna have a library typed
Yeah,
slash
we'll see.
JSX. Who knows?
There's there's plenty of stuff coming in the future, without a doubt.
Good, good.
Yeah,
Again,
thanks for having me.
Tyler, thank you very much. I'll publish this soon, and I guess we can now stop the recording. Anything else you wanted to mention?
Yeah, just I guess I'll say to the people who are maybe interested in dog fooding this sort of stuff, I definitely have a vision. I definitely have strong opinions, but I'm very flexible and I'm very open to what other people think and where they think this could go. Because I only have so many ideas in my own head. Very receptive to any sort of feedback, positive, negative. I'm not too sensitive. I have pretty thick skin, so throw it at me.
Good, good.